The greatest corporate heist in history. How the East India Company looted a subcontinent. In the 18th century, a trading company transformed into a global power, reshaping the fate of an entire subcontinent. The British East India Company began as merchants, but through cunning diplomacy, military force, and ruthless exploitation, it seized control over vast regions of India. Manipulating local rulers and draining resources, the company extracted unimaginable wealth, textiles, spices, and precious metals, while millions suffered under harsh taxation and famine. This unprecedented heist laid the foundations for the British Empire, leaving a legacy that still echoes today. What if I told you that the world's most successful corporation wasn't Apple, Google, or Microsoft, but a 17th century trading company that managed to steal an entire subcontinent's wealth while convincing the world they were just doing business? Picture this: a small group of English merchants, armed with nothing but royal charters and ruthless ambition, systematically dismantling one of the world's wealthiest civilizations over the course of 2 centuries. This isn't the plot of a Hollywood thriller. This is the true story of the East India Company, the corporate empire that turned grand larceny into an art form. The merchant princes arrive in 1600, when Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to the Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. India controlled nearly 25% of global GDP. The Mughal Empire was arguably the world's wealthiest nation, with cities like Delhi and Agra rivaling London and Paris in grandeur. Indian textiles were coveted across Europe. Indian steel was legendary, and Indian spices literally drove global exploration. The East India Company's founders weren't conquistadors or kings, they were accountants with armies. Unlike traditional colonizers who conquered through pure military might, these merchant warriors perfected something far more insidious. They made exploitation profitable, systematic, and seemingly legitimate. The art of corporate conquest. The company's genius lay not in what they took, but in how they convinced everyone, including many Indians, that they weren't taking anything at all. They arrived as humble traders, requesting modest trading posts in coastal cities like Surat and Madras. But like a financial parasite, once they embedded themselves in the Indian economy, they began to slowly drain its lifeblood. Their first masterstroke was exploiting India's political fragmentation. As the Mughal Empire weakened in the early 18th century, hundreds of regional rulers emerged, each seeking military advantages over their neighbors. The company positioned itself as the neutral party, the helpful ally who could tip the balance of power. For a price, of course. Robert Clive's victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757 wasn't just a military triumph. It was the moment a corporation became a sovereign power. By backing Mir Jafar against Siraj-ud-Dawla, the Nawab of Bengal, Clive didn't just win a battle, he engineered the first corporate coup in history. Bengal, one of the world's richest provinces, fell under company control not through conquest, but through what we'd now recognize as a leveraged buyout funded by local collaborators. The machinery of extraction. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. One that makes modern corporate scandals look like petty theft. Once in control of Bengal, the company unleashed what historian William Dalrymple calls corporate violence on an unprecedented scale. They didn't just tax the population, they revolutionized extraction itself. The traditional Mughal tax system, though burdensome, at least maintained local infrastructure and provided protection. The company's system was pure extraction, maximum revenue with minimal investment. Consider the numbers. In 1757, the company's annual revenue from Bengal was around £2 million. By 1780, it had risen to £13 million, while Bengal's economy shrank by an estimated 50%. This wasn't economic growth, it was systematic asset stripping on a continental scale. The company's administrators weren't just corrupt, they were corruption elevated to a science. Every position, from tax collector to judge, was essentially a franchise opportunity to extract wealth from Indians. British officials would buy their positions, then recoup their investments many times over through what they euphemistically called presents and perquisites. Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General of Bengal, accumulated a personal fortune worth approximately £400,000, equivalent to roughly $50 million today, during his tenure. And he was considered relatively restrained compared to some of his contemporaries. The Bengal famine, when greed became genocide. The company's extraction reached its horrifying peak during the Bengal famine of 1770. As crops failed and millions starved, company officials continued demanding taxes from the dying population. In some areas, tax collection actually increased as administrators argued that fewer people meant the survivors should pay more per capita. Contemporary observers estimated that 1/3 of Bengal's population, approximately 10 million people, died during this famine. Yet the company's shareholders in London received their dividends without interruption. This wasn't just corporate negligence. It was deliberate policy. Company correspondence from the period reveals administrators calculating how famine-induced depopulation would reduce future administrative costs. The textile tragedy, destroying an industry to create dependence. Perhaps nowhere was the company's systematic destruction more calculated than in India's textile industry. In 1700, India produced roughly 25% of the world's manufactured goods, with textiles being the crown jewel of this production. Indian cotton was so superior that it dominated European markets despite the costs of transcontinental shipping. The company's solution was breathtakingly cynical. They would destroy Indian textile production and force Indians to buy British-made goods instead. Through a combination of punitive taxes, forced cultivation of raw materials, and outright sabotage, they systematically dismantled centuries of artisanal expertise. Weavers in Bengal were forced to sell exclusively to the company at below-market rates. Those who resisted had their thumbs cut off. Entire weaving communities were relocated or dispersed. Within a generation, regions that had been textile exporters became importers of British cloth made from Indian cotton. The numbers don't lie. By the time the company's rule ended in 1858, they had orchestrated what economists now recognize as the largest transfer of wealth in human history. Conservative estimates suggest that between 1757 and 1857, the East India Company extracted wealth from India equivalent to $45 trillion in today's currency. This figure includes direct taxation, forced tribute, artificially suppressed prices for Indian goods, inflated prices for British imports, and the compound effect of preventing Indian capital accumulation for over a century. To put this in perspective, this amount exceeds the entire GDP of the United States in 2023. It's more than the combined wealth of the world's 100 richest individuals. It represents not just what was taken, but what was prevented. The schools, hospitals, roads, and industries that could have been built with this capital. The bureaucracy of plunder. What made the company's extraction so devastating wasn't just its scale, but its systematic nature. They didn't just steal. They created institutions designed to steal continuously and efficiently. The revenue collection system, the legal framework, even the educational curricula were all designed to facilitate wealth transfer from Indians to Britain. Every aspect of governance became a profit center. Justice was literally for sale, with company courts openly accepting fees that determined verdicts. Infrastructure projects were commissioned not to benefit Indians, but to facilitate extraction. Railways ran from inland production centers to coastal ports, designed to export raw materials rather than connect Indian markets to each other. The ultimate corporate crime. As you close this account of history's greatest corporate heist, consider this unsettling parallel. The East India Company never disappeared. It evolved. The same systems of extraction, the same logic of infinite growth at others' expense, the same ability to make exploitation seem like natural economic law. These didn't vanish when the company lost its Indian territories. They simply found new forms, new territories, new populations to extract from. The company's true legacy isn't just the wealth they stole from India, but the proof that corporations, given enough power and insufficient oversight, will optimize for extraction over human welfare every single time. Today, when we see multinational corporations avoiding taxes while receiving government subsidies, when we witness the systematic extraction of wealth from developing nations, when we observe the concentration of global wealth in fewer and fewer hands, we're not seeing something new. We're seeing the East India Company's business model, refined and perfected for the modern age. The company didn't just loot India's treasure. They wrote the playbook for corporate colonialism that's still being used today. And perhaps that's the most chilling realization of all. The greatest corporate heist in history wasn't a historical aberration. It was a prototype.